Hi everyone, and welcome to week 5 of ADV 342, Account Planning and Research. In this first lecture for this week, we're going to be talking about the basics of qualitative research. Specifically, here are our objectives for this lesson. We're going to discuss the basic assumptions that underlie qualitative research, learn how to apply motivational research and projective techniques in qualitative research for account planning specifically, and learn how to develop good questions for qualitative research. We're going to start off with a bit of a review of the differences between quantitative and qualitative research. Qualitative research, as you may remember from last week, uses in-depth techniques to discover consumer behavior and emotions, whereas quantitative research uses numerical data to gain statistically significant information. Qualitative research uses small sample sizes, whereas quantitative research uses large sample sizes that are more generalizable to the greater population. In qualitative research, we ask mostly open-ended questions, whereas in quantitative research, we ask mostly closed-ended questions that can be described in numbers. Qualitative research is subjective, meaning it's the researcher who's interpreting observations and findings, whereas in quantitative research, we're dealing more with objective interpretation, using statistical inference related to the numbers that we've measured. In qualitative research, we focus on what we see and hear in terms of developing insights about the consumer. In quantitative research, we often conduct research anonymously, with minimal contact with the consumer. Next, we're going to look at the assumptions that guide qualitative research. Now, I want to pause here to say that often we hear the word assumption and think of it as a bad thing, but I'm using a different definition of assumption here. You can think of these more as the basic principles that all qualitative researchers agree on and build their work off of. First, we assume that consumers are not rational. Second, we assume that consumers are unaware or unable to express their true motives, which is why we employ motivational research strategies. We use small sample sizes, which means that the findings we generate from qualitative research are not necessarily generalizable to a larger population. Instead, they give us specific key insights. Qualitative research is ideal for initial steps, for trying to think about promotional campaigns, about products, about the positioning of a particular product or brand in reference to the competition. And with those assumptions in mind, I'm going to take a moment here to highlight a particular type of qualitative research called motivational research. Motivational research is a term of art that refers to qualitative studies that were conducted by Dr. Ernest Dichter in the 1950s and 60s, which were designed to uncover consumers' subconscious or hidden motivations in the context of buying and consumption. I'd like us to watch this video that explains motivational research a bit more.
Psychoanalysts were about to move into big business and use their techniques not just to create model citizens, but model consumers. Last week's episode showed how Freud's American nephew, Edward Bernays, had been the first to convince American corporations that they could sell products by connecting them with people's unconscious feelings. But now, a group of psychoanalysts were going to take what Bernays had begun and invent a whole range of techniques to get inside and manage the unconscious mind of the consumer. They were led by Ernest Dichter. Dichter had practiced next door to Freud in Vienna, but he had come to America and set up the Institute for Motivational Research in an old mansion north of New York.
This is the Institute for Motivational Research, a place devoted to the intriguing business of finding out why people behave as they do, why they buy as they do, why they respond to advertising as they do. And this is Dr. Ernest Dichter.
We don't go out and ask directly, why do you buy, why don't you? What we try to do instead is to understand the total personality, the self-image of the customer. We use all the resources of modern social sciences. It opens up some stimulating psychological techniques for selling any new product.
Like the other psychoanalysts, Dichter believed that American citizens were fundamentally irrational beings. They could not be trusted. Their real reasons for buying products were rooted in unconscious desires and feelings. And Dichter wanted to find ways to uncover what he called the secret self of the American consumer.
He was trying to get out of people's mind the unconscious motivations that they had for purchasing. These could be sexual, they could be psychological, they could be sociological, they could be a demand for status, a demand for recognition. There were things that people couldn't verbalize or wouldn't verbalize because they were too secret to them. They were too much a part of their nature, and they would be embarrassed. They would be embarrassed if they came out and said things like this.
He would interview people, but not ask them direct questions, but let them talk freely like you do in psychoanalysis. And that was his background.
And so he said, why can't we have a group therapy session about products? All right? And so Dichter built this room up above his garage, and he said we can have psychoanalysis of products. They can actually act out and verbalize their wants and needs.
What we're going to do is try a couple of these salad dressings. So let's see what happens. Here's our typical housewife. She doesn't follow the instructions.
And they could be observed and watched, and other people could comment, and they could talk about it, and everybody could join in. He was the first to do this. This was absolutely the first thing that was ever done. And he had a movie projector up there where you could show advertisements and things like that, and people could react to them. And he invented the whole technique for mining the unconscious about the hidden psychological wants that people had about products. This became the focus group.
It worked!
Dichter's breakthrough came with a focus group study he did for Betty Crocker Foods. Like many food manufacturers in the early 50s, they had invented a new range of instant convenience foods. But although consumers had told market researchers they would welcome the idea, in fact they were refusing to buy them. The worst problem was the Betty Crocker cake mix. Dichter did a series of focus groups where housewives free associated about the cake mix. He concluded that they felt unconscious guilt at the new image being promoted of ease and convenience.
In other words, he understood that the barrier to the consumption of the product was the housewife's feeling of guilt about using it. They basically, on one hand, wanted to make it easy for themselves, but they felt guilty about it. So what you've got to do in those circumstances is remove the barrier being guilt. The way you do that is to give the housewife a greater sense of participation.
And how do you do that?
By adding an egg.
Simple as that.
As simple as that.
Dichter told Betty Crocker to put an instruction on the packet that the housewife should add an egg. It would be an unconscious symbol, he said, of the housewife mixing in her own eggs as a gift to her husband, and so would lessen the guilt. Betty Crocker did it, and the sales soared.
My cake is ready.
The consumer may have basic needs that the consumer himself or herself doesn't fully understand. You have to know what those needs are in order to fully exploit the consumer. Is it wrong to give people what they want by taking away their defenses, helping remove their defenses?
It seems so much longer than last year.
It is. Nearly 4 inches longer in some models.
Oh!
Dichter's success led to a rush by corporations and advertising agencies to employ psychoanalysts. They became known as the Depth Boys, and they promised to show companies how to make millions by connecting their products with people's hidden desires. Dichter himself became a millionaire, famous for inventing slogans like "a tiger in your tank." Even the marketing of the Barbie doll came from a children's focus group.
And so it goes.
But Dichter was convinced that this was far more than just selling. Like Anna Freud, he believed that the environment could be used to strengthen the human personality. And products had the power both to sate inner desires and give people a feeling of common identity with those around them. It was a strategy for creating a stable society. Dichter called it the strategy of desire.
To understand a stable citizen, you have to know that modern man quite often tries to work off his frustrations by spending on self-gratification. Modern man is eternally ready to fill out his self-image by purchasing products which complement it.
If you identify yourself with a product, it can have a therapeutic value. It improves your self-image and you become a more secure person and you have suddenly this confidence of going out in the world and doing what you want successfully. Berners believed that that would then improve the whole of our society and become the best society on this planet.
So in motivational research, we rely on what are called projective techniques. And we do that because it's really difficult to obtain accurate information by asking people direct questions. It's much easier to allow them to project their thoughts onto something else, another object or another person. And by doing so, we uncover unconscious associations, reflections to ambiguous stimuli, and underlying motivations that are projected onto the stimuli. Now, there are a ton of projective techniques, and I'm going to highlight just a few of them, but if you Google projective techniques, you'll get a much longer list. One common example is mind mapping, where we tell people to visualize their total view of the brand in a free form, and then we try to build maps. And I'll show you an example of this in a moment. We also have word associations, where we try to get them to link the brand to particular words and how they feel about the particular brand. We have sentence completion, asking them something like, if I buy brand X, my friends would say this, or people who buy brand X are like this. There's also cartooning, where you give them a blank template of a cartoon and ask them to fill in the bubbles and try and reflect on what the brand means to them. Here's an example of a mind map for Coca-Cola. And you can see all of the words that were salient to participants. So the darker of the color of the words, the more salient they were, the more often they came up across different participants. And here's an example of cartooning that was the result of a research study done on Porsche that informed the design of a new campaign for Porsche. And there are many other techniques like this, but I just wanted to give you a few examples. And all of these techniques can be used in all sorts of qualitative research studies, like ethnographies, in-depth interviews, and focus groups, each of which you'll be conducting in this class. Next, I'm going to have you watch a clip from The Persuaders, which is a Frontline documentary, and in this particular part of the documentary, you can see the use of projective techniques that really gets at the innermost feelings of the consumers about a particular brand or concept. So let's watch.
Far away from the boardrooms of the entertainment industry, in places like this nondescript office park outside Boston, the nitty-gritty work of selling starts with a simple questionnaire about bread.
And now, what do you see as the disadvantages to eating grain-based foods?
Today, faced with a nation hooked on low-carb diets, the baked goods industry needs to find out just how Americans feel about their products.
Okay, I'm going to read you some different emotions. I've got a whole list of them here. For each one of them, I just want you to tell me yes or no as to whether or not you think you feel that emotion when you're eating white bread. Okay? The first one is accepting. Do you feel accepting when you're eating white bread?
Yeah, I would say yes then.
Affectionate?
No.
Lonely?
No.
Disappointed?
No.
Afraid?
No.
Trusting?
No, I don't think that would be an issue.
Would you feel uncertain?
Yeah, a little uncertain. I've got one question.
Uh-huh.
Can I ask a question? The question was, when you eat bread, do you feel lonely? Have you found people say yes, they feel lonely when they're eating bread?
Not a lot on this one.
Welcome to the strange world of market research.
Now, we have to be careful because that's not politically correct to say women and inside.
Where those who claim to have figured out the hidden desires of consumers are treated as gurus.
We all come from a woman. We all spend 9 months inside of a woman. So women are expert in the inside. Translation, when a woman buys a car, the first thing she is looking at is, do they have cup holders?
Dr. Clotaire Rapaille lives in a baronial mansion in upstate New York. Fortune 500 companies and their advertising agencies flock there to drink French champagne, admire Rapaille's many cars, and listen with rapt attention to his insights on the irrational mind of the American shopper.
And we have to understand for each product what is the dynamic behind that. What is it that people are really buying there? We still have people that buy things that they don't really need. Sometimes a product is not expensive enough.
What sets Rapaille apart from many other market researchers is his belief that consumers are driven by unconscious needs and impulses.
My experience is that most of the time, people have no idea why they're doing what they're doing. They have no idea. So they're going to try to make up something that makes sense. Why do you need a Hummer to go shopping? Well, in case I need to go off-road. Well, you live in Manhattan. Well, you need a four-wheel drive in Manhattan. Well, sometimes I go out and this is... You don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that this is disconnected. This has nothing to do with what the real reason is for people to do what they do.
Rapaille began his career as a psychiatrist in Europe studying autism.
My training with autistic children is that I had to understand what these kids were trying to tell me with no words, because they don't speak. Wow. So then that's part of my training. How can I decode this kind of behavior? Which is not a word.
Rapaille claims that there are unconscious associations for nearly every product we buy, buried deep in our brains.
One of my discoveries was that when you learn a word, whatever it is, coffee, love, mother, the first time you understand, you imprint the meaning of this word, you create a mental connection. And so actually every word has a mental highway. I call that a code, an unconscious code in the brain.
Corporations love the idea of buying a single key to the psyches of vast numbers of consumers, a simple code that lies behind millions of individual decisions. Rapaille gave up psychiatry and says he has never looked back.
I have 50 of the Fortune 100 company as clients.
Tonight, Rapaille has been invited to speak to the Luxury Marketing Council of America.
The premise of the council is to bring the smartest minds in marketing together and help us all figure out ways to get more money from customers with the most money.
Rapaille has been commissioned by a handful of big companies like Boeing and Acura to break the code on luxury.
We're just delighted to have you with us.
Thank you. I don't believe what people say. So some people listen to what they say and they say, do you want to buy that? Do you want to do this? I don't believe what people say. I want to understand why they do what they do. I found this word, and with that, I want to understand you guys. And this is the word. I hope I didn't make a mistake, but the right spelling?
To crack the code on luxury, Rapaille conducts a series of focus groups.
I'm serious. That's what I want to understand, how you feel about it. And anything for me is interesting.
Money.
Money! He takes his subjects on what he hopes will be a three-stage psychic journey. Past reason, through emotion, to the primal core, where Rapaille insists all purchasing decisions really lie.
We start with the cortex, because people want to show how intelligent they are. So give them a chance. We don't care what they say. When people try to sell you luxury things, what kind of word they use?
Well-made.
Well-made. Nothing new there. And then we have a break. They're usually very happy with themselves. Say, oh, we did a good job, and so on. When they come back, now we go into the emotion. And I tell them, you're going to tell me a little story, like if I was a 5-year-old from another planet.
Once upon a time.
Exactly.
So suddenly they are into a mindset that is completely different. They don't try to be logical or intelligent. They just try to please a 5-year-old from another planet.
I will send you and your entire family to Maui.
They don't understand what they're doing anymore. Good. That's what I want. At the end of the second hour, when we go to the break, they say, this guy is crazy. What is he doing? I thought I understood what we were doing. Now I don't understand anything. I mean, I get paid to do that? This is excellent. This is what I want.
Chosen for a new reality show.
That's what it is. A reality show.
Right.
Wait, there's 19 of us?
They're gonna give
we
you,
all have our rooms?
They're
That's
going to give you
right.
$1 million, so they want to see how you spend it.
Maybe
if
that's
you
what
waste
they're
it or
doing.
not.
Then when they come back for the third hour, then there is no more chairs. Oh, what is going on here? How come no chairs? And I explained to them that I would like them to try to go back to the very first time that they experience what we're trying to understand.
Rapai is hunting for our primal urges. He's after what he calls the reptilian hot buttons that compel us to action.
It's absolutely crucial to understand what I call the reptilian hot button. My theory is very simple. The reptilian always win. I don't care what you're going to tell me intellectually. Give me the reptilian.
So I'm going to turn the lights off now, and we're going to all relax together.
I want you to be in a mindset a little bit like the one you have when you wake up in the morning. You'll be surprised to see that things come back to your mind that you forgot for the time for 20, 30 years. It's amazing.
The scribbles of consumers in the semi-darkness, half-remembered words and pictures associated with luxury, somehow become Rapai's key to unlocking the luxury code.
Once you get the code, suddenly everything starts making sense. I understand why this car sells, this car doesn't sell. I understand why a small 29,000 Cadillac cannot sell. No, I understand why, because it's off code. Ooh.
Over the years, Rapai has told car makers to beef up the size of their SUVs and tint the windows, because the code for SUVs is domination.
Découvrez le caractère.
He told a French company trying to sell cheese to Americans that they were off code.
Par ses soins donne tout son goût au vieux pané.
In France, the cheese is alive. You never put the cheese in the refrigerator because you don't put your cat in the refrigerator. It's the same, it's alive. If I know that in America the cheese is dead, and I've been studying cheese in almost 50 states in America, I can tell you the cheese is dead everywhere. Then I have to put that up front. I have to say this cheese is safe, is pasteurized, is wrapped up in plastic. I know the plastic is a body bag because you can put it in the fridge. I know the fridge is the morgue. That's where you put the dead bodies. Eh? And so once you know that, this is the way you market cheese in America.
It just got easier to just say cheese.
One word that kept coming up in the stories, and I think is a reach, reaching to the next level.
While Clotaire Rapai and his clients continue their quest to crack the code on luxury,
it might be interesting to explore the difference between first class and world class.
Song Airlines is running out of time and money. A year into operation, the full marketing team convenes in Las Vegas to assess how the experiment in creating a lifestyle brand is working out.
On behalf of Song, I want to welcome everybody here to Las Vegas. This time last year, this airline was a project. We had to create a brand, a product, an identity, and everything that is Song today out of absolutely nothing. This team has done an incredible job of introducing the brand called Song, this new airline.
But there are clouds on the horizon. Parent company Delta is losing billions of dollars, and Song's marketing budget has been drastically cut. The intangible thing called Song must deliver some tangible results. To do so, it must penetrate the distracted minds of Americans. The news so far is mixed.
Right now, the greatest thing that you've done so far is build a really solid brand identity for yourself that's coming through completely clearly in the advertising. People are completely identifying with it.
But while people are responding to the advertising, many consumers don't know what the advertising is for.
In terms of overall recall, 35% of our sample felt that they had seen you somewhere. Where we do start to see a slight problem in terms of which airline do you think this advertising is for? We're losing almost 50% at that point. So what we're calling our true recognition figure is those people who both saw the advertising and were confident and knew that it was for Song, and that was 15% of our sample.
Making matters worse for the Song marketing team, runaway success JetBlue has decided to go after the same markets as Song.
This one was unique. Boston Herald, which is kind of like New York Post or New York Daily News, more of a tabloid-ish newspaper in Boston, sold their front page. They actually allowed hard news to be pushed off the cover. So the entire cover looks just like a Herald cover, and if you're walking by a newsstand and you saw it, you were like, wow, JetBlue must really be important because they're on the cover of the Herald, when they really weren't.
Song cannot compete dollar for dollar against JetBlue, so they must be more nimble.
I think we're very much a guerrilla military force going out and fighting against the big guys. We're going to have to pick and choose our battles and do it wisely, placing media in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect an airline to be.
Handing out at concerts branded earplugs.
We like the scratch and sniff new plane smell.
Nightclub hand stamps. So instead of getting the club name, you would have the song logo.
The fictional story where someone in need gets an invitation to a mystical villa on a little-known island off of Italy's coast. What does that have to do with song? This is just one example of a story that might come out from songbooks.
With few bankable ideas, Song's marketing effort more than ever will depend on its TV commercial. A few weeks later, the Song team flies out to Los Angeles to hear consultant Andy Spade describe his final vision for the commercial.
We can also introduce, like, from the side, like that girl running through, like this little kid runs by, and then suddenly out of nowhere comes, this other woman who's kind of running through camera. So all these people are going toward this gate, which is obviously somewhere. These are happy people. It's like, these are happy people. We're almost a voyeur watching these happy people running through this thing, and we're boarding them now. And I feel like you look at that and you'll just say, wow, this thing is about these things. From a
Spade is scanning headshots for faces that exude the essence of Song.
I thought models are wrong. Yep. Real people are wrong because it makes it very kind of pedestrian. Real people, but they looked like they were happy. Not real people like LA law people. They feel very Song.
Yeah.
She feels very Song. He feels very Song.
It's definitely coming together.
It just brings you, to this place, but not being weird.
Right. Magical without being, like, surreal is kind of a tough thing to pull off.
Exactly.
It's sure as hell hard to describe. So
it's very hard to describe. That's why it sounds corny saying it,
yeah.
but the pieces are coming together.
Happy.
Spade's ad finally went on the air, but it may have been too little too late. Though Song has built loyalty, its parent company, Delta, is careening towards bankruptcy and may bring Song down with it. In Tuxedo Park, New York, Dr. Rapai is also nearing the end of his process. He's ready to unveil the code on luxury.
Can change the content.
Rapai's clients, who represent industries as diverse as insurance, automobiles, and fragrances, are filled with anticipation. Having together paid several $100,000, they are convinced the code will give them a competitive advantage no matter what they're selling.
I think the code we discover was there already a long time ago and is going to be around for generation and generation.
We were not allowed to see the actual code. Its secrecy is worth a lot of money to Rapai's customers.
The content might vary again, but the structure is the same.
But the clients, many of whom have worked with Rapai before, are enthusiastic.
So far, you're sold on what he's doing?
Yes, I strongly believe in what he's doing. Strongly.
Mark Salmon is the vice president for development at Firmenich, a Swiss fragrance and flavor designer.
We need to absorb the code, check it, create products that are in code. Try to understand, looking at what is existing, what are the on-code and off-code.
We're here because we are always looking for ways to be more competitive in the marketplace.
Blake Emery is an executive at the Boeing Corporation, which has been working with Dr. Rapai for almost a year.
The interior of our new airplane, the 787 Dreamliner, much of that interior is based on research that we did with Dr. Rapai. Everything you see has an overt improvement, but there is also a hidden, unarticulated itch that we're scratching. And I can't give you an example of those.
So in other words, the bigger bin, if you find out
see, there's an
people
obvious...
see the bin as mommy, so then you make the bin shaped like mommy, so now they get mommy out of it? Or is there another feature somewhere?
Once this information gets out into the marketplace, once our interior is out there, the competition can copy it, right? You would say, well, why don't they just make a bin like that, and then they can do just what we did. However, if you don't really know why we did the bin the way we did, you will not do it right.
Of course, It's impossible to know if Rapai's excursions through the collective unconscious really uncover what drives us, whether to Boeing airplanes or any other product.
Thank you, Ma.
But even if he is onto something, you have to wonder about the net effect of reducing us to our most primal impulses.
What about the environment? If the lizard wants the Hummer,
Right.
and the lizard's not going to listen to the environmentalist,
Right.
then isn't it our job as aware people to get the reptile to shut up and appeal to the cortex,
All right.
to appeal to the mammal?
Now you see, the problem is that if you think, right, the people that want to do good, not always do good. All right? So the people that want to do good, for example, let's say, okay, we need to make smaller cars, right, to protect the environment. Then nobody buys this smaller car. Why? Because they're too small. So then the result, if they're going to try...
Looks like I'm not going to win this one. After all, it's hard to argue against the reptilian brain.
The problem is we have to understand the unspoken needs of the people. It works. Good marketing research works. When we say it works, it means that marketers understand the real need of the customers, sometimes unspoken, and they deliver. Give me what I want.
And so we've talked about different projective techniques that can be used in qualitative research studies. And now I want to get more specific for a moment and talk about the types of questions you might want to ask and how to develop them. Again, these guidelines are going to be relevant for any qualitative study, whether it's an in-depth interview, a focus group, or an ethnography. First, you should always start with twice the number of questions that you think you'll actually be able to use. Then narrow them down to the most important ones. Be clear and use concise, clearly worded, unambiguous language. Keep the questions short. Less than 20 words is ideal. You always want to ask truly open-ended questions in qualitative research. And this is easier said than done. Sometimes we think a question looks open-ended, but then our participants end up answering in a single word or two. And that's an example of a question that's not really inviting an open-ended response. So instead of saying, do you like brand X? You're going to want to ask something like, tell me your feelings towards brand X, or tell me how it makes you feel to use brand X. You always want to invite your participants to think and elaborate as much as possible. Now here are some types of questions that you generally want to avoid. You want to avoid emotionally loaded questions, such as, how much do you love brand X? Or leading questions like, most people your age like brand X, so tell me how you feel about it, right? And in those cases, you're already priming them to give you a positive response, which means you may not be getting truthful answers. Double-barreled questions are questions that ask about two different things at the same time. And the danger here is that participants might answer, but you won't know which particular aspect of the question their answer was related to. An example here would be, tell me what it means to be a millennial using brand X and brand Y. Right? You can see there that you're really asking about 2 or 3 distinct concepts. You also want to avoid questions with false premises, such as, because brand X consumers are outgoing, I would assume that you are outgoing too. Right? You wouldn't want to make that kind of an assumption for the participant. And generally, you also want to avoid using the words always and never. Do you always shop at store X? That's a really tough question, right? What do we mean exactly by always? Obviously, the consumer isn't spending 24/7 of their life inside the store, so it's better to be more specific whenever possible. A few other things to consider when you're planning a qualitative research study. Budget. Qualitative research can be costly. You need to evaluate and choose the method that is most effective in terms of the time and cost that it takes to gather the data. Scheduling. Again, it takes time to conduct good qualitative research. It's not something that you can just put out online and gather responses for within a few minutes or hours. So you need to be able to convince the client of the importance of qualitative research and the importance of waiting a few weeks rather than just a few hours to get some data. You want to do that by highlighting the incredible insights that you can gain from the in-depth analyses that you can do with this type of research. Finally, you need to be very aware of how critically important the role of recruitment of participants is. Your participants need to be from your target audience, and they need to be clearly justified of why you are focusing on this particular group. This brings us to the end of this lecture. To recap, We looked at the basic assumptions of qualitative research. We learned how to apply motivational research and projective techniques in qualitative studies for account planning. And finally, we examined strategies for developing good questions and considerations for planning qualitative research studies. See you in the next lecture, where we'll talk about ethnography, the first qualitative research method that you all will employ for your group projects for this class.